So our mission today, let's really try to get under the hood, understand these intricate guidelines, uncover the ethical side, the procedures, and frankly, show why it's all so crucial for, well, integrity and compliance in this field. It's growing so fast globally. You'll definitely get a clearer picture of how these foundational decisions get made.
Okay.
Let's jump right in. Okay, first things first. Let's nail down some basic terms. When we're talking institutions, what exactly is a fatwa? And what's an istifta?
Right. Good place to start. It's important to be precise. So a fatwa, basically, is the clarification of a Shari'ah ruling.
Okay.
It's given to someone who asked about a real situation, something that's happened or, maybe is expected to happen.
Right, a concrete issue.
Exactly. And the istifta, that's simpler. It's just the act of asking for that ruling. It's the question.
The request itself. Got it.
Yeah. And what's really interesting in this standard is how it frames the obligation around these.
Obligation. How so?
Well, for a qualified person, issuing a fatwa is generally fard kifaya. That's a collective obligation, meaning if some qualified people do it, others are sort of absolved.
Okay, the community responsibility.
Right. But it can become fardain an individual obligation if, say, nobody else is available, or if the ruling is specific to that particular institutional board.
Ah, okay. So it can fall squarely on one person or group.
It can. Now, flip side, for the institution asking for the fatwa, the istifta is wajib.
Wajib.
Obligatory, exactly. So the institution, they don't really have a choice. They have a duty, a positive duty, to seek a Sharia ruling for any new thing they plan to do or any incident that comes up.
Wow. Okay. So for institutions, it's definitely not optional. It's a required step. That's quite different from me just asking a scholar a question, isn't it?
Huge difference. And it also means, like you hinted, they can't just shop around.
Right.
An individual might pick a scholar they think is most knowledgeable or pious. But institutions, they're bound by their own rules, their internal systems. They have to seek fatwas from their own Sharia supervisory board.
Their internal board. Makes sense.
And the scope is also defined. These institutional fatwas, they're mainly about practical financial rulings, sometimes related to acts of worship, but primarily finance. It's very focused.
A very specialized area then. It sounds like a huge responsibility. So who are these muftis? The people on the Sharia board. What kind of qualifications do they actually need? It surely can't just be, someone who's read a few books.
No, absolutely not. And that's a really important question because the qualifications are, well, they're rigorous, and they go way beyond just academic knowledge. Board members need what's called malaka fiqhiyya. It's often translated as jurisprudential acumen.
Acumen. Like an innate skill.
Exactly. It's not just knowing facts. It's this deeper skill to understand, interpret, and actually apply Islamic law effectively. Like a specific kind of legal mind, but for Sharia.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It is. And beyond that, they need to understand the statements of past mujtahids. These are the really high-level, independent scholars from history.
Giants.
Right. And crucially, they need the ability for takrij fiqhi that's like derivation or istinbat, which is inference, especially for new issues, things that just didn't exist before.
So figuring out answers for modern problems based on principles.
Precisely. But it's not all theory. They need shrewdness, alertness, real understanding of people, of real-world conditions. Even the standard mentions, people's tricks or ways they might try to get around rules.
Wow, okay. Street smarts too, almost.
You could say that. And maybe the most critical point. Zero personal interest in the subject of the fatwa. Complete impartiality.
That seems absolutely essential. What I find really interesting here, though, is the standard says expertise in all branches of fiqh, of Islamic law, isn't actually required for these institutional fatwas.
That's right.
Being proficient, specifically in financial transactions, is enough. That really highlights how specialized this is, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not a general theologian role. It's very much a targeted, almost legal ethical role within finance.
Okay, so the fatwa gets issued by this qualified board. What happens next? What are the institution's obligations? Is it always just a command they have to follow?
Another key point. It depends. It really depends on the type of ruling.
How?
If the fatwa says something is obligatory, or if it prohibits something, then yes, the institution must act on it. Immediately. No wiggle room there.
Okay, clear commands.
But if a fatwa permits something, gives a jawaz ruling, permission, then the institution actually has discretion. They can choose not to act on it if they decide there's some practical benefit to refraining.
Oh, interesting. So permission doesn't equal obligation to do it.
Exactly. It shows a balance, right? between the religious guidance and operational needs or strategy.
Yeah, that's a subtle but important distinction.
Very. And another thing, if new information comes up later, something relevant to an old ruling, the institution should go back and ask for a new fatwa, re-seek it.
Makes sense. Things change.
And importantly, an institution can't just grab a fatwa issued by some other body, an external one, and run with it, not without explicit approval from their own Shari'ah board.
Okay, so definitely no cherry-picking rulings from outside.
And it sounds like they can't try to push their board towards a certain answer either. You got it. The standard is very clear on that. An institution cannot demand its board issue a fatwa, according to a specific school of thought, a madhab.
Right.
The only exception is if the issue might end up in court later, and a particular madhab is legally binding in that jurisdiction. Otherwise, no telling the board which interpretation to use.
Keeps the board independent. Good. This whole process, it sounds incredibly detailed. How do the muftis actually, do it? How do they issue these? What's the method?
Yeah.
And the ethics involved. It feels like a mix of deep scholarship and, well, practical judgment.
It absolutely is the starting point. The fatwa has to be based on agreed-upon Sharia evidence and principles, solid ground.
Okay.
Now, when scholars disagree, which happens, of course, the mufti has to weigh the evidence and go with what they see as the strongest argument.
Makes sense. What's definitely not allowed? That often tells you a lot.
Good question.
Okay.
Definitely not allowed.
Yeah.
Basing it on just personal opinion, that's out. Also, it cannot contradict clear, authentic, definitive texts, Quran or Sunnah, or established consensus, ijma, or those really fundamental, overarching Sharia principles. Those are non-negotiable.
The bedrock, basically.
Exactly. And for new issues, where maybe there isn't an explicit text, the board can't just say, oh, well, don't know. No. They have to apply the principles of jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh, the methodology, the legal theory to derive a ruling.
So they have a toolbox to build an answer, even if one isn't ready-made. And they don't do this in isolation, right? They can talk to others.
Absolutely. The process encourages getting accurate information, consulting other boards, other experts, even benefiting from collective reasoning, collective ijtihad.
Collaboration.
Yes. Now, while they usually have to answer, the board can actually abstain or put restrictions on a fatwa if they're genuinely worried it might be misused. Used for something not aligned with Sharia, it's a kind of safety valve.
A protection mechanism.
Right.
Got it. Beyond the sort of legalistic side, there are clear ethical rules too, aren't there? Specific don'ts.
Oh, definitely. A clear ethical compass. For instance, they must avoid overinterpreting texts or basing rulings on, say, weak or unproven prophetic traditions.
Okay, stick to solid sources.
Right. Verifying consensus, quoting scholars accurately from original sources, that's crucial. If the evidence is balanced, or if there are multiple valid options, they should lean towards the easier one. Promote ease, not hardship.
That seems humane.
It is. They also need to use sad al-darai. That means blocking the means to potential harm.
Blocking the means. How does that work?
It's about being proactive. If a certain path, even if technically okay, could easily lead to something forbidden, like riba, interest, you block that path. You structure things to prevent the harm while still trying to find a valid way forward.
Ah, okay. Preventative ethics, almost. And what about things like dispensations? Making exceptions. Rukaz rus. That sounds like a tricky area.
It can be. Genuine ease is allowed when circumstances truly warrant it. But using rukaz, using these dispensations, can't become the default method if it ends up leading to something that scholars generally agree is wrong. It's for real need, not for finding loopholes.
Got it. No loophole seeking.
Precisely. And, critically, they are absolutely forbidden from guiding institutions towards Sharia tricks. Hi, all.
Sharia tricks.
Yeah, these are deceptive practices. They might look okay on the surface, follow the letter of the law, but they totally violate its spirit or purpose, like a transaction designed only to sidestep a rule with no real economic point. That's hayal, forbidden.
Okay, substance over form.
Exactly. They also have to avoid rushing fatwas, not rush to prohibit just because something's new and unfamiliar, and not rush to permit just to fit in with existing laws or practices.
Careful deliberation.
Yes. And one last thing here. Just because they say something is permissible, that's not an endorsement. It's not saying go do this. It's just clarifying its status under Sharia.
A clarification, not an invitation. Okay, so the ruling itself is complex. How is it actually presented? Is there a formal structure for the fatwa document? It sounds like it needs to be treated very formally.
It does. For institutions, while technically maybe a verbal fatwa could be valid, the standard says it must be written.
Written record. Essential.
Absolutely. And the language has to be crystal clear. No ambiguity that could be misunderstood by non-experts or, frankly, twisted by someone with bad intentions.
Clarity is key.
Paramount. The board also has to state its preferred ruling clearly when there are different scholarly opinions. If a ruling has lots of parts, each needs to be spelled out. Now, interestingly, providing the evidence for the ruling isn't strictly required for it to be valid.
Oh.
Yeah, an institution can't reject a fatwa just because the board didn't list all its sources, but the standard says the board should indicate the basis for its ruling. It adds weight, transparency.
Right, best practice. Are they usually short documents, or can they be long?
Generally, shorter is better. Brevity is preferred. But there are exceptions. A fatwa can be lengthy if there's a good reason. Maybe it's needed to convince regulators, or the issue is just super complex.
Okay, flexibility there.
Yes. In those cases, they might include broader objectives, extra evidence, maybe even warnings. They can also add info that wasn't strictly asked for if it helps avoid misunderstanding or clarifies the real point.
Proactive clarification again.
Yeah.
And the format itself. Any specific requirements?
Yes, quite specific. The written fatwa should start with a formal opening like the basmala in the name of God, hamdallah, praise be to God, salawat, blessings on the Prophet.
That's the tone.
Deeply. Embeds it in its spiritual context, and it should end similarly or with, and Allah knows best. It needs to be legible, signed, dated, and stamped on every single page.
Every page, wow. Like a legal document.
Exactly like that. Total integrity of the document. There needs to be a clear link, an audit trail back to the original request, the istifta. Ideally, the fatwa even summarizes the question it's answering.
Traceability.
And for fatwas from the board, the content must go into the official meeting minutes, following all the rules for minutes. Creates that formal, permanent record.
That level of detail is really something. It shows a huge commitment to accuracy, to accountability. But, I mean, people aren't perfect. What if the Shari'ah board makes a mistake? Is there a way to fix an erroneous fatwa?
Yes, a critical question. And the standard is very clear here. If the board finds out it made an error in a fatwa, it must retract it.
Must retract, okay.
Yes. Inform the institution, correct the ruling itself, and deal with any consequences that came from the bad ruling. No burying mistakes.
Full transparency and correction.
And the institution.
Yeah.
They have a duty, too. They have to correct anything they did based on that wrong fatwa and make sure it's never used again. It's a joint responsibility to fix it.
Ensures the system stays sound. And can a board just revisit an old fatwa? Even if there wasn't an obvious mistake, maybe circumstances change or thinking evolves.
Absolutely, yes. And this really shows the dynamic side of it all. The board can reconsider a previous fatwa. They might do it themselves, or the institution might ask them to look again.
Right.
And this reconsideration can even lead to a new fatwa that actually contradicts the old one.
A complete reversal.
It can happen if the reasoning changes or new evidence comes to light. When that occurs, the institution has to follow the new fatwa from that point on, and they need to manage any fallout from what they did based on the old, now superseded fatwa.
So it's a living, self-correcting system. That's quite sophisticated.
It really is. It allows for adaptation while keeping the core principles intact.
Okay, we've covered the process, the methodology, the corrections. What about the mufti themselves, the person? Beyond the rules, what about their personal ethics, their conduct?
Right, the adab al-fatwa, the manners and ethics. This is also outlined in the standard. It's seen as crucial.
What does it include?
Several key things. First, deliberation. Taking time, verifying info, being sure the answer is clear, avoiding recklessness, snap judgments.
Patience and care.
Exactly. Second, consistency. Trying hard not to give conflicting fatwas on the same issue in the same situation. That builds trust.
Predictability, yeah.
Third, focus. Not issuing a fatwa if their mind is elsewhere, distracted. Sound judgment needs mental clarity.
Makes sense.
And fourth, a really big one for institutions, confidentiality.
Okay. How so?
They must keep secret any information that isn't strictly part of the Shari'ah ruling itself. Things like institutional secrets, staff details, how exactly something is applied. Their job is the ruling, not leaking sensitive operational info.
Protect the institution's confidentiality.
Got it.
That really does underscore the immense trust, the responsibility on the mufti's shoulders is this blend of intellect, ethics, practical wisdom.
A profound combination, yes.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Standard 29, what we've really seen is, well, it's a whole world, isn't it? Meticulous detail, ethical rigor, a sophisticated method behind these religious edicts and institutions. It's so far from just a casual pronouncement.
Miles away from it.
It's this carefully built process, all designed to ensure integrity, ensure compliance in a really specialized, really important field.
That's the goal.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this level of systematic governance, the transparency, the self-correction mechanisms we talked about, it's not just about being religiously compliant, is it?
This serves a broader purpose.
It feels like it's designed to build real trust and accountability within finance, which definitely needs it. It shows how religious principles, when applied really rigorously, really intelligently, can actually be a solid, adaptable framework for complex modern operations.
A robust framework indeed.
So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to kind of mull over. This dive into Standard 29, it shows these institutional religious edicts aren't some throwback. They're carefully crafted legal, ethical tools for financial integrity. So what could be the wider implications? Think about this kind of precise self-correcting framework. Could it impact trust, maybe even innovation in other regulated sectors? Banking, tech, healthcare. Could elements of this systematic approach to ethical decision-making, could they offer insights for any complex organization trying to balance doing the right thing with, well, adapting to reality? Something to think about.